I think that prayer was more that I wouldn't preach as long as I did in the first service. That's what she was really focusing on. So, hey, in case there was any confusion, our service was supposed to start at 10:30. And I did preach a little long in the first service, which made it a little hard. And then some of you showed up just maybe a little later than 10:30, so we delayed a little bit. But if you are planning to make this your regular service, do know that we will do our very best, like we did usually, to start right on time at 10:30 as we move forward. So Happy New Year, everybody. First time I've gotten a chance to see most of you since the new year started, and it's great to have you here. And we're going to start a new series today. You know, I told the first service, you know, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, you know, what's your favorite verse? You know, I mean, you know, you're in a life group or just hanging out. What's your favorite verse? You know, I don't know. Maybe they're just more interested because I'm the pastor. What would be my favorite verse? And, you know, I've always been a little bit reluctant because I think about it, you know, the whole thing is God's word, right? He spoke it. But so it's kind of like saying to God, you know, you kind of blew these parts, but this is better, you know? So you always kind of feel a little kind of, you know, strange about saying, well, I like this part of the Bible better than another part because it's all God's word. But I would say if I had to put into like my top three, the focal verse for our new series would be in that top three for me. And it comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. We saw this just a minute ago. It says, "For the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth, so that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his." Would you say that with me? It's on the screen, so you can just read along with me. "For the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth, so that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his." And we want to focus in this series on how to have a heart that's completely his. But here's why. And the story that we've read today, and we're going to come back to it again next week. We might even come back to it a third week. It depends on how much insight God gives me. But this tremendous truth that God, envisioned with eyes, is constantly looking around the earth, right? 360 degrees in either way you want to go, north and south or east and west or whatever. He is constantly looking to strongly support the heart that is completely his. That great truth is revealed to us on the occasion of a missed opportunity rather than a seized opportunity. Right? King Asa had just had this victory over Baasha at the beginning of chapter 16, and the seer, this messenger from God, comes and he says, you know what? You have victory, but you won the battle. But man, you could have won the wars. You missed out on the opportunity of having God strongly support the heart that is completely his because you trusted in Aram, King Ben-Hadad, instead of trusting in me. And the whole goal of our series is for you and I not to miss the opportunity to have God strongly support our hearts. And in order for that to happen, our hearts have to be completely his. So we're going to be talking about what that really means. You know, I think about it coming out of 2020, right? 2020 was a crappy year, right? We're not taping this, right? So I can say it's a crappy year, right? And so we're coming around to 2021, and I got to tell you, it sounds even better than ever to have a year in which we are enjoying the strong support of God because our heart is completely his. So I want to spend some time before we dig into our passage today. Christina's already read our text for us. I want to do some time looking at the context that we're in. Because God doesn't speak in a vacuum. God speaks and he works in history. And we can learn a lot of things and understand the dynamics of how God's people are responding to his activity by understanding what's really going on. So when we get to 2 Chronicles chapter 16, we're kind of jumping into the middle of the movie, right? You know, don't you love it when you're watching a movie and then somebody comes into the room and they're like, oh, what's going on, right? You just got to hit the pause button and bring them up to speed, right? Well, I want to hit the pause button and kind of bring us up to speed so you'll understand the rest of it as we go forward. And the first thing I want us to understand is that we're in the period of time in the development of God's activity among his people that we are actually dealing with a divided nation of Judah and Israel. We are 20 years removed from the death of King Solomon. And upon his death, when Rehoboam took over for him in Jerusalem, the 10 northern tribes decided to depart. We'll come back to that in just a minute. So we are a long way into the story of God and how he's trying to work redemptively through the descendants of Abraham to redeem the whole world. Right? We've got Moses has already led the people out of slavery, led them into Mount Sinai where they formally became the nation of God, and they have moved up to the edge of the promised land where God hands the leadership to Joshua and he leads them into the promised land and they have the conquest. We've had the 400-year period of the judges where God was supposed to be the king of the people and they were supposed to be his subjects and he was supposed to be the only leader they needed. Didn't work out so well. The people would stay close to God, things would go well. Then they would turn away from God and things wouldn't go so well. And they were running this roller coaster for 400 years. So finally they get down to the end and they started to say to Samuel, who was really the last of the judges, the beginning of the prophetic family in a lot of ways, and also the kingmaker that God used, they came to Samuel and said, we want a king. This whole thing of just kind of relating to God who's in heaven, we're having a hard time with that. And we want a king so we can relate to somebody like all the other people around us. So the first king that the people of God have is Saul. And then after Saul doesn't live up to expectations, God hands the kingship to a different family from among the family of God, and that is to King David, who's a man after God's own heart. Doesn't mean he's sinless, doesn't mean he's perfect, but he has a heart for God. And you're going to see a big contrast between him and Asa, the way he responds, right? You see, you have King David. When David passes on, Solomon becomes king. And under Solomon, who when God said, all right, listen, I'm going to sign my name to a blank check. What do you want me to write in there for you? And he says, you know what? All I want is your wisdom. I just want your wisdom. And God used that wisdom and the nation prospered. They became a dominant nation in the Middle East. They were prosperous. Solomon's wisdom and leadership was renowned. And the people of God kind of surged. He was this young nation, and they kind of surged to be in the one percenters, if you will, of nations across. And all the nations around them had to look to Israel, look to the people of God, look to Solomon for leadership. All of that, when Solomon died, there was a divide that became among the people. And here's really the gist of it, right? And when Solomon was building he's building the temple, he's building the city of Jerusalem, he's building these fortifications, he's doing all this stuff. Where are all those workers coming from? They're all drafted, right? So they're off fighting wars and making the country more prosperous, or they're working on the temple or this and that, all these kinds of things. And they're not at home mending the fence of the farm. They're not fixing the leaky roof. The taxes are high because this is all going to be paid for. So when Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam takes over the throne, the whole nation comes to him and says, listen, we get it, but you need to give us a break for a while. This whole thing of yes, we know we need to build the nation, we do this and that, but you got to let us go home for a while and spend some of our money on fixing our own fences and taking care of our own roofs. You got to let our children stay home long enough they can help us plant the fields and harvest the crops. So Rehoboam, at that moment in time, he turns to his advisors for input. And he's got one group that came from his father's tree, right, who say, you really should listen to the people. You're not in a position to demand this from yet. Make sense. give them a break. Then he's got his own group that he'd kind of grown up with, and they're like, you know what, you're the king. They got to do whatever you tell them to do, and you want to make a name for yourself and this and that. So he goes back to the people and he says, you think my father made you work? Just wait till what I see him make you do. And so in that moment, 10 of the tribes decided, we're out of here. And so they withdraw and they form their own nation. And that nation is called Israel. And they dominate the northern part of the Promised Land for several hundred years until God sends them off into exile at the hands of the Assyrians. Their new leader, the person that they make king, is a guy by the name of Jeroboam. And he has to establish a whole new form of worship and all that kind of stuff, and because they can't go to Jerusalem anymore, and etc. And there's that whole dimension that goes on. The southern kingdom is known as Judah. And so if you're reading through the Bible and you've seen the names Israel and Judah, and so the only two tribes that stayed faithful to the line of David were Benjamin and Judah, and they dominated the southern part of the Promised Land. Asa, the guy in our story, is the king of Judah. Solomon was his grandfather, and then great-grandfather. After him, his grandfather Rehoboam was king. When he died, Asa's father, Abijah, became the king. He was only king for 3 years. But somehow or another, even after just 3 years, he was old enough to have a son, Asa, who was ready to come to the throne. Asa was probably, a teenager, a late teenager, a young adult, maybe 16, 17, maybe 20, 21, 22. He certainly wasn't 40. And we know from what we just read, he served for 41 years. So in this context, what we see is that the nation had been divided between Israel and Judah for 20 years. And Asa comes to the throne, the great-grandson of Solomon, in a time when there's still a lot of bickering between the two nations. Right? They're still fighting over identity and natural resources and alliances with the people around them, and who's going to control the traffic flows and all that kind of stuff. And actually, under Asa's father, there had been a major confrontation between Jeroboam, who was the king of Israel, and Asa's father, Abijah. And when Jeroboam came down to attack Abijah, he said, you know what? Rehoboam's off the scene. We got this new king. This is the time when we're going to go back to being one country, but it's going to be under me. So Jeroboam comes down. They outnumber the nation of Judah 2-1 in this battle. 800,000 versus 400,000 in the armies. But because the southern kingdom was acknowledging their dependence upon God, and they were the ones who were committed to trying to continue the true practices of the people of God through the priesthood and through the temple and etc., God gave them a great victory over their northern brothers. So it's a time of a lot of bickering going back and forth. But it's not just the two of them, right? You keeping up with me here, Peggy? I got you confused, right? So, so which point are you on? There you go. You're jumping all around. So we're underneath the two nations sparred with each other regularly. Now, they weren't there by themselves, and this is all part of understanding the story. There were other major world players at work. The biggest force, if you will, the strongest nation in the world at that point in time was actually to their south. Christina's translation referred to them as the Ethiopians. They were actually the Cushites. And the Cushites were, their kingdom, if you will, was built around the area that is today modern-day Ethiopia. And they were actually Cushites who became like the Pharaoh of Egypt, and they were kind of over the whole thing. There were actually Libyans who were also a part of that. And so they are the major power to the south. And they have an intense interest in Judah and Israel because that's their highway to the rest of the world. If they want to go to the east, they want to go to the Middle East, if they want to go into Europe, they got to go through the Palestine. So they want to have control over the Promised Land. They also want to use it as a buffer as for any other nations that are going to come up against them. So they're the major player, and actually Asa faces a confrontation with them in chapter 14. Zerah, who is the king over the Cushites at that moment, we believe he was the king, he might have been the commander of their army. He comes up to the southern edge of Judah in the plain where the Philistines had their cities, and he comes with 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots. And he takes on Asa, who has 480,000 men. That's it. So they're outnumbered 2-1. They're all on foot, and the other side's got tanks. They got chariots. I mean, it's not a pretty picture. But Asa is going to lean on God in those moments, and we'll see that in just a second. But to their north, there's another guy, and that's Aram, Ben-Hadad, and he comes into our story in chapter 16. And really, you know, his interest in the whole thing was, you know what, when Solomon was strong and it was one nation, they were a pain in our neck, right? They had their thumb on us, and so we don't want that anymore. So anything he could do to keep them bickering with one another, he did. And so we're going to see that come to fruition in this text. You know, and at one moment of time, he's willing to be in alliance with Baasha, because at that point in time, the two of them are stronger for anybody coming in from the north and that kind of thing. But when Asa reaches out and says, hey, you know what, will you come attack Israel so they'll withdraw from me? He's like, you know what, that's good for me. The weaker I keep them, the better off I am. So he's just playing them both against one another for his own dynamics. So that's the historical context, right? Anybody asleep yet? All right. So Asa has a journey, right? And his story doesn't finish well. It starts great, but it doesn't finish well. When Asa comes to the throne, right? His father's only been the king for 3 years, and he dies. And he's got this huge family, but out of that, Asa is chosen to be the king. He's a younger guy. And right away, he is faced with a major challenge to his kingship. Because the Cushites are looking at it and saying, you know what, Rehoboam's gone. Now, Abijah just died. Got a new king. There's a lot of chaos. It's weak. This is the time to go up and make sure that they understand who's boss in this part of the world. So up comes Zerah with his 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots. And Asa, this young leader, gathers up his troops, goes out. They got 480,000 guys. And he's looking at it. And he's like, we don't have a prayer. So we better pray. Right? He says, we don't got a prayer. So we got to pray. And so this is exactly what he says in chapter 14. Verse 11. Then Asa cried out to the Lord. Said, Lord, there's no one besides you to help the mighty and those who are without strength, meaning us at this moment, right? Help us, Lord our God, for we depend on you. And in your name, we have come against this large army. Lord, you are God. Do not let a mere mortal stand in your way, hinder you. Right? Asa is saying, you know what? We've come out to do battle because you know what? If we lose this, the people of God, who are the protectors of the temple, are going to be destroyed. And your redemptive plan, your desire to have a people who are pure and who can worship you, who can be a blessing to the nation, is going to pass away. And we need you. And they rout the Cushites. These 480,000 guys force 1,000,000 men and 300 tanks to stick their tails between their legs and run south. In fact, they're running so fast, they run right by their supply depot, and they leave everything behind that could feed and equip 1,000,000 men. Now think about that for a minute. We're in Worcester County. Worcester County extends from Connecticut to New Hampshire. There's a little over 600,000 of us in the county. Now, so just think about every resource that is in Worcester County, essentially double it. That's what they inherit from this victory. Just like that, Asa is a wealthy man. In fact, as they're chasing them and they get to that point and they get to the supply depot, they also kind of raid all of the Philistine areas around there that were feeding them. So they're bringing home flocks and they're bringing home equipment and they're bringing home clothes and they're bringing home, and he's instantly wealthy, all because he relied on God. And and that is bookend by the fact that for a long segment of Asa's kingship, he sought God. When he took over at the beginning of took over kingship in chapter 14, the very first thing the scripture tells us is that he sought God. It comes up this way in chapter 14, verses 2 through 4. As soon as he became king, he built his kingship on God's mission. And he said, and so Asa did what was good and right in the sight of his Lord his God. He removed the pagan altars and the high places. He shattered their sacred pillars, and he chopped down their Asherah poles. He told the people of Judah to seek the Lord God of their ancestors and to carry out the instructions and commands. That's what he did when he first became king. Then he's threatened by the Cushites, and he relies on God. Then he get a word from God that says, you know what? God is with anybody who's with him. And he gets that from Azariah, and that's in chapter 15. And we're going to look at that next week as a part of some other stuff. But what God's saying, you know what? The only reason you're outside of my blessing is because you've moved. It's not because I've moved. It's because you've moved. God is with anybody who's with him. And he's having tremendous success. The years begin to tick along. Asa is getting, he's been king a decade, 20 years. We don't know exactly how long. Altogether, he served for 41 years. Later in his kingship, he faces a crisis. Right? Jeroboam to the north finally dies, and a new king comes to the throne, Baasha. And he is tired of playing second fiddle to Asa. So he comes down and he builds a stronghold just north of Jerusalem, which cuts off Asa from all of the people from Israel who were still trying to go to the temple, buy all their goods down there, that kind of stuff. All the trade that could come in from the north, he cuts all of that off, and he tries to blockade Asa. Asa, in that moment, could have turned to God like he did when he faced the Cushites. But he doesn't do it. What he says is, you know what, I can handle this. So he says to his servants, you know, we're pretty low. We got resources coming out of our pockets. Just run over to the temple, get some of the gold and the silver. And he says, all right, here's my letter. I want you to take this. I want you to get around Israel, and I want you to get up to Aram. I want you to get to Ben-Hadad. And this is what I want you to say to him. Listen, your father and my father used to have a treaty together. I want to renew that. And here's my sign of goodwill, bribery. And I want you to enter into an alliance with me and break your alliance with Baasha, with Israel. And then I want you to attack them from the north, their backside, right? All of their forces are in the south, right? So they start taking Naphtali and Dan and some of the other cities that are to the north. And so Baasha has to withdraw to go with it. And then we see the first major recycling program ever, right? They take everything that was being used to build Ramah, and they move it and they use it to build other cities. So at the end of the day, Asa sits down and says, that worked. I'm a success. Diplomacy and bribery, Baasha's gone, and I got a couple of new cities. And we've got peace. What else can anybody want? And then the seer, Hanani, shows up. And he says, you know what? Because you relied on the king of Aram instead of on God, you're going to have wars going down the road. You could have had peace that lasted, because you would not only had Baasha's army, you would have had Ben-Hadad's army as well, and God would have given you peace. He would have conquered everybody to the south, and he would have dealt with everybody to the south, to the north, and the people of God would have had peace. But you didn't rely on God, and that outcome has escaped you. And he says, and keep this in mind, for the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth, looking to strongly support the heart that is completely his. Now listen, we're going to keep on processing this for a week or two, but here's some takeaways that I think that God wants us to really understand. And I've kind of grabbed it together in my own mind as under the labels of ERA, but not Equal Rights Amendment, but the idea of we have an ever ready and able God. For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro, roam throughout the earth, looking to strongly support the heart that is completely his. Our God is ever ready and able to support the heart that is completely his. One of the takeaways that we should have is that God is always at work. In terms of his eyes moving around, he doesn't even blink, right? He's always at work. But there are times we get into our journey and we ask, where's God? There are times like it feels like we can't hear him. There are times like we can't see him, we can't feel him, those kind of things. Listen, God is always at work, right? He never rests. His eyes are always moving, seeking to intervene in history to fulfill his mission. God is always, he is constantly, and I use the word vigorously in my point for you this morning, or you could use the word aggressively. God is constantly and aggressively looking for people that he can support to fulfill his mission. He's looking, all right, who's there? Who can I use? Who can I? And here's the thought I want you to see in relationship to the view of how we see God as a giver, if you will, to us. The image that the scripture tries to give us here is so powerful, right? God is not hesitant. He's not resistant. He's looking to support anybody whose heart is completely his, who is in alignment with his passion. Let me give you just kind of an example, right, for us. Steve's turning up the heat for those of you who are cold, or you're turning down the heat. Turning up the heat, there you go. Don't turn it on too hard. I'll be sweating. I'm having too much fun. It's going to go too long, too. So we did start late. I want you to know I get an extra 10 minutes at the end. Let's just imagine that, let's use this example, right? We decide, one of the best ways we can serve the youths of our community, going back to my cousin Vinny days, right? The best way we can serve our younger people in our community is to build a skate park. So it's going to build a skateboard park, all the ramps and jumps and all that kind of stuff, right? And so this is a big community project. And you're going to raise a lot of money. And so you can kind of categorize three different types of donors. So one group that might support it is the kind of person that they hear about it, and they run a business in town, they're a part of the community, and you've got to call them over and over and over again, right? You call them, you get an answer from them. Hey, this is so-and-so, we want to see if you're interested. Going to call them again. Finally, after a long period of time, you finally get them on the phone. And they say, yeah, I got your message. They go, well, what's going on again? And how much money do you need? And, kind of, what are you doing? And how's this going to work for me? How much do you really want from me? And, and finally, when they figure out that all the other businesses in town have already ponied up, and theirs is going to be the only one without their name on the plaque, that's there, say, you know what? All right, I'll give you a donation. That's one type of giver, right? Second type of giver is the type of person that they read the stories in the paper, They watch the thermometer in the center of town as the red line goes up as you get closer and closer to your fundraising goal. And finally, somebody gets around to calling them and says, hey, have you heard about, oh, yeah, I've been reading the articles. I think it's a great idea. I've been watching the thermometer going up and that kind of stuff. And they say, well, hey, would you like to donate? Yeah. Send me a pledge here. I'll send some money in. Like that. The third type of donor is like this. You've kind of had this idea, you get a small group together and you have your first organizational meeting and the group votes that they want to proceed, right? And so somebody sends out a tweet, right, or posts something on Facebook. And when you're driving home from that meeting, when you walk in the door of your house, your phone is ringing, right? And the person on the other end of the line is saying, hey, I just saw that post online about what you guys are going to do. I think that is a great idea. How much money do you need? You know what? I don't think your project is big enough. I think you should grow it by 30% and put me down for the difference, right? The kind of person, you know what? This is something I thought I'm all on board. Which image of God do we get from this passage of Scripture? Is it the first one? Maybe. Maybe not. Yeah, is what's in it for me? Clearly not, right? It's not even a picture of God that says, you know what, if you ask me, I'll give it to you. It's God standing there saying, I'm just looking for the person who's doing what I want to be done. You know what? I'm looking for someone who's got the same passion as me, and they don't even have to ask me. I'm ready to strongly support them if their heart is completely mine. That's the image of God we got. He is constantly and aggressively looking for the heart that is completely his. And so that really kind of leads me to this third point I want to make. And that is that God is, so the heart that is completely his is the one that God is ever ready and able to strongly support. And so that's really where the crux is, right? And we're going to spend some time looking at it in the next few weeks, and then we're going to move over to the Sermon on the Mount and see some of these principles at work. But one of the questions, well, how can I tell if my heart is completely his? See, let me draw something out of the text in the experience of the context, and then I'll try to make an allusion to us. Asa's objective was to have peace for his kingship, right? That was his objective. So I want the people to have peace. I want the crops to still be ours. I don't want people to die in the field. I just want to have peace. And so he knew he had a way where he could win the war without having to fire a single bullet. All he had to do was send some money around the backside and get the king of Aram to attack Israel, and he was done. It's not a bad objective, actually. For the people of God to have peace in Judah, not a bad thing. What's God's agenda? God's agenda is to grow a people who are fully dependent upon him, through whom he can redeem the world. God's agenda is not just to give Judah peace for another decade. God's agenda is to grow a people who are fully dependent upon him, who have centered their worship around him, through whom he can send his son to redeem the world, to be a blessing to the nations, right? That's God's agenda. And those two things don't line up. It's not that the one is bad, it's just not God's agenda. It's maybe a part of God's agenda, but God's agenda has to be fulfilled God's way. Let's look at it for myself. I ask myself, how can I tell for myself if my heart is completely his? Now, we're going to see next week. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you're sinless. It doesn't mean you're a spiritual giant. It doesn't mean that you can look down on Billy Graham from the spiritual totem pole, right? It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It does mean that your heart resonates with the things that resonate with God's heart, that are the passion on his heart. That's why he's ready to pick up the phone and saying, anything you need, you got it in double, right? And here's a difference. When my prayer life, and perhaps your prayer life, is dominated about what you need from God, the stuff that deals with the circumstances that you're in. God, I really need a new job. God, God, I really could use a raise. Or God, this person I care about is sick, healing, whatever. God, I need wisdom on how to make this decision, whatever. We're praying from God for all the things that we need in the midst of our circumstances. Nothing wrong with those things. But if that's where our prayer is, we're a lot like Asa in that moment. What do I need to do to be able to flourish in the circumstances I am in? There's a whole nother dimension. And this is where Asa missed out, which is asking God, God, what is my witness for you? God, how do I be a witness for you? It's not just, God, how do I survive in my circumstances? But it's, God, how do I be a witness for you? How do I be the light of the world? How do I be the salt of the earth? How do I be an agent of your grace? How do I be redemptive for you? How do I be a part of the people who's fully dependent upon you, through whom you can redeem the world? And that's a whole different level and dimension. And when we are saying to God, when our heart is to be a witness for God shows up in a powerful way and strongly supports our heart. I'll never forget Bill Maher, who's gone to be with the Lord, was a part of our life group. And when Bill first found out that he had cancer, he really pursued a lot of the different treatments and things. All the way through, he said, I just want to do this. I want to do this in faith. I want to do this in faith, that kind of thing. He got to a point in his journey where he was convinced, and he knew that the medical treatments were not going to bring healing. And then God had not indicated that he was going to bring healing to him. And I'll never forget, and Paul, I think you were there that night with us, when Bill sat in our room, and you could tell he was heartbroken in a lot of ways. But he said to us, but this is how I want you to pray for me. I want to finish this journey well. I want to be a witness. So he said, I want to be a witness. When we're doing those kinds of prayers, those resonate with the heart of God, because God is always about seeking and saving the lost, right? And when God is ready to show up and do the incredible. Right? He's already on the end of the line. Anything you need and more. And when that happens, circumstances are not relevant anymore. You can be outnumbered 2-1 and they can have tanks. And it's not going to change the outcome. So that really just leaves us with who we're going to be in this. And again, we're going to be processing what does it really mean to have a heart that's completely His. But it really starts to say, the most important thing that we do in our journey is choose what we're going to depend upon or who we're going to depend upon. Are we going to depend upon all the money we have in the treasury and our diplomatic skills and our ability to read the dynamics well enough and to know how to get to our solution and et cetera and make our enemy withdraw? Are we going to rely on ourselves or on somebody else, or are we going to rely on God? And in that moment, we're not going to just win the battle. We're going to win the war with God over evil through His grace. It's a powerful choice to make. Because are we relying on our wisdom? Are we relying on our own definition of success? And that drives very much what we're looking to depend upon in our own journey. I said in the first service, like when you go back and you look at, like on a Friday afternoon, you're driving home from work and you're saying to yourself, you're driving home and says, all right, and so you're asked like, well, did you have a good week or not? What do you think about in terms of having a good week? Is it, I got a good evaluation from my supervisor, or I got a promotion, or, I landed a couple of new accounts, or I solved some problems, or I worked through all my to-do lists, or my sermon's already written so I can enjoy my day off. We get all these kinds of things. Or is it, what? On Tuesday, God gave me a chance to be a witness to person A. And on Thursday, I got a chance to follow up on that witness. Man, that was a good week. Because I got to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And so it really comes down, and when you and I make this choice, there are only two options. It's God and anything else. It's God and anything else. There is no in between, and there's no little bit of God. It's God or anything else. And I will tell you, one of the things that I'm fearful for in the church in America today is that we are sometimes relying on Christian tradition and habits rather than relying on God for the fulfillment of the kingdom. It's about the way we do church rather than truly worshiping the God who's ready to strongly support the heart that is completely his. So at the beginning of this journey, I want to do two things. I want to challenge you, first of all, to memorize our focal verse. It's not hard, right? So everybody put their hand in the air. All right, you just committed to memorizing 2 Chronicles 16:9a, right? For the eyes of the Lord, right? Roam throughout the earth, looking to strongly support the heart that's completely his. You guys can memorize that, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is ask yourself, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to be with him so that he can strongly support you because he's with you? Let's pray together for just a minute. God, it's an incredibly important choice. Show us how we are dependent upon you and guide us in choosing you. We know narrow is the gate and tight is the path that leads to life. That's what we want to choose. So, Father, lead us to be a people who are completely yours. If there's ever a vivid reminder of our complete dependence upon God, it's the picture of Jesus' death on the cross for us. I think all of you got communion elements as you came in this morning. I'd love for you to get that. Getting a little piece off the top can be a little bit of a challenge. Anybody missing any? We're kind of breaking the spiritual moment here. If you don't have one, just raise your hand. We're all good. You know, as Jesus was gathered in the upper room with his disciples on the last night of his life, he asked them to do something. He said, I want you to remember on a regular basis what I've done for you. And I want you to use an element of a piece of bread, an element of juice or wine from the grape. And I want you to do so because it is a reminder of what I've done for you and the fact that you are totally dependent upon me for salvation. And there's no better place to be than completely his, totally dependent upon him. So as Jesus gathered with his disciples that last night of his life, he said to them, take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. And then the challenge for them to remember him. He said, this cup is a covenant, the new covenant in my blood. Drink from it, all of you. What a vivid reminder to us that we are totally dependent upon God for our very relationship with him. And it's a great place to start, to be completely his in every element of our lives. We're going to stand and sing a final song. And I know we're switching gears. As you leave, there is a trash can just out the door here to my left, your right, and you can throw your little pieces in there. And if you have some time this week, read 2 Chronicles. You could even go back in chapter 13 and read 13, 14, 15, 16, not very long. Some good reads. Start working on the memorization. And thanks for being here. Let's continue our time of worship as we move to our conclusion.